everyone is involved in this entire thing, and even the embassies are involved. So like it's like a multi-dimensional thing that goes on whenever a prisoner has to be sent back, or any person, even if it's not a prisoner, any person who doesn't have a valid document, if they have to be sent back, then it's like a long process. What I do want to focus on is so all of this information, whenever the police have to inform the embassy, or the prison has to inform the embassy, or the state government wants to inform, it all has to go through the MEA. That channel is so set in stone that there is no other way around it. And that also means that if you send something now, it probably might reach them like a month later. And if they send something back to us, it'll come again a month later. So, that kind of problems are there. That's one of the bigger things on the whole process. Then, of course, the information on arrest doesn't happen. The embassy is not informed of decisions when a conviction takes place, so they have no idea where the prisoners are. Issuing of emergency travel documents should be done 2 months before the process, but in actual, it actually happens probably 3 or 4 months later from after you've done your sentence. The time-taking provisions, of course, consular visits. Now, an embassy has to write to MEA to get permission to go and visit him in prison. That takes a lot of time. Contact family for funding. Now, your family might not, as I said, if you've not spoken to your family in 10 years, you don't know where the family has gone to. So we were trying to do this case of a Palestinian. His family had actually moved to Egypt, and his parents were not there, and the embassy was able to locate the niece. But that's like a very rare case. For all the others, and especially the Nigerians that we deal with, there is nothing. There is no family. There is no one. There's a Ukrainian also, the person I was talking about, the 14 years one. He had a 1-year sentence, and he's been still in prison. He doesn't want to go back. He doesn't have a family. So if we had, ensured that contact when he was arrested, he probably would still have contact with his family and wanted to go back. Of course, the trial takes time, as with everyone else. The deportation order has to be issued, which can take a lot of time. The police informed to arrange escorts. Now, escorts, again, it's a huge problem. There are no escorts. There are too many duties. There's too many vacancies. So this is essentially, where the entire, what are the issues in the process. And the reason I'm talking about this in detail is because this helps understand what are the problems in the law. Now, the problems in the law very specifically are, so the arrest. Now, Article 36B, so the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations talks about, about the obligation on the competent authorities to inform the consular post of the concerned state if within its consular district, a national of that state is arrested or committed to prison or to custody pending trial or is detained in any other matter. So whenever a person is arrested, whenever a person is sent to prison, whenever a person is transferred to a detention center, the intimation has to be sent to the consulate. However, we have absolutely no mandatory provision in the national law which says that. We just have, as I said, you have the model laws which talk of model police law which says, you have some state police manuals talk about it, but that's about it. There is not even any MHA or any MEA guideline or circular which says that this has to be done. Now, adjudication. So as I said, Section 9 of the Foreigners Act, the onus of proving that such person is not a foreigner should lie upon such person. Now, this is, of course, problematic, as I explained. Statelessness, as I was saying, so you have the Sheikh Abdul Aziz case, which talks about some guidelines about it, but that's only for one case. That's not been extended to others. And, of course, it's not taken up elsewhere as well, as far as I know. And I do know there are a lot of stateless people who are in prison right now as we speak. Now, the continued detention and deportation. Now, where is the problem in the Foreigners Act? So, of course, Section 2C, which says power to make orders for removal, which is fine. A country has the right to remove people. I think that's fine. But Section 3.2EE, Foreigners Act, power to make orders to reside in particular place, impose restrictions on the movement. Now, these two things, to me, are very problematic, especially if you look at Article 21. So Article 21, of course, talks about liberty and nobody can take it away without due process. Where is the process here? With the central government, and in most of the cases under Section 3, the central government has delegated a lot of its powers to the state government. Now, where is due process here? What in the world allows the government to detain someone indefinitely under these orders? You are actually taking away somebody's liberty without due process. And I think this is extremely problematic. And I also feel is a problem is that this has not been raised in the cases that are going on in the court right now, in the Supreme Court. They don't challenge the Foreigners Act. But what is needed is you need to challenge the Foreigners Act and ask where are the due process rights over here. Now this is, I'm just going to end. We're coming out with this national study on foreigners in Indian prisons. We'll be releasing this in January. So any of you who want a copy, please, you can give me your email address. My colleagues are there. You can give your email addresses to them and we'll definitely send you. We'll also be having a consultation in Delhi. So if you want to be a part of it, you can just let us know. Yeah, all right, thank you.
With regular status here, having this conversation, none of us looks like we're a migrant. And I think migrants in prison are even more invisible. So it's good to have someone here who interacts with them, who speaks to them on a regular basis as part of their work. We are now going to open the floor for discussions amongst the panelists, as I said. I'm happy to take questions from the audience as well, shortly. But since the format requires us to start the discussion off, I will ask the first couple of questions maybe. And then we can have questions from the floor. Is that okay? Okay. So I'm going to start with something that's familiar territory to me. Like I said, I'm largely a refugee law person, not so much a migration person. I am going to start by asking Mr. Golageri the first question. Which is, he spoke about this regime for the management of people on the move not really being existent at an international level, which is quite true. We do have certain agencies. Like he said, for goods and even for services, there is the WTO, which regulates transactions. But there's nothing quite on a similar scale and quite as respected, let's say, for people. What I was going to say was there is the UNHCR, which is supposed to be the agency. It's a legitimate UN-mandated agency that regulates the movement of refugees and asylum seekers, which is understandably, I mean, admittedly, the most vulnerable class of migrants, because they are forced migrants. They are people who are leaving their countries, traveling without even really wanting to and without being prepared for it in most cases. So what I would like to say is, what is your view on this? Why is UNHCR discounted, not just here, but generally, as the agency that is supposed to be respected and looked to for regulating the flow of migrants? Why is it largely something that governments adhere to only voluntarily, not mandatorily? Is it losing relevance? Has it ever had a lot of relevance, to be honest? That's, I think, the first thing. I will start there, and then I have a couple of questions for each of the other panelists, and then we can throw it open to the audience.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a very important question. So let me, illustrate what the problem is by referring to the WTO. Okay. So what is, as lawyers, what do you think is the difference between the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs that was existent prior to the WTO and the WTO? One was that the WTO became a rule-based binding arrangement, institutional arrangement. You had to become a member and you were bound by the rules of the WTO. Second was that the WTO provided for a dispute resolution mechanism, which means if you were a defaulter, there would be consequences that would follow, right? Now, the problem with the international migration regime, whether you look at any one of the three dimensions that I spoke about, let's take economic migration for mobility of labor, pure and simple. There are no problems about asylum, refugees, prisons, etc. Just mobility of labor. Is there an international regime? No. If there is some kind of an arrangement, it's mostly bilateral. And at a multilateral level, you have the Global Forum on Migration and Development, but they are all non-binding. So the UNHCR, without doubt, has played an extremely important role. I think it's an important institution, but its influence is limited simply because it is within the sovereign powers of a state to either agree to what it says or disagree, right? If India was not to act on a UNHCR recommendation, what consequences will follow? Nothing, right? So I think there is a need now at the global level to have, simply because, see, we spoke about numbers. Dr. Venkatrao in his opening remarks spoke about how there are 240 million, that it has grown from 140 to 240. That's a bit of a, statistics mask more than they tell. Fact is that if you look at the last 30 years, the global population of migrants has remained at roughly 3% of the global population. Okay? So the jump from 140 to 240 happened more because borders moved rather than people moving. After the breakdown of the Soviet Union, many of the people who were, Russians who are in Ukrainian territory or Bulgarians who are in Hungarian territory, etc., found themselves as migrants because they were non-nationals of that country. So I don't think numbers is the problem. I think the question really is, and this is my answer, since the complexity of mobility, global mobility, has increased, covering most countries, there's scarcely any country that is not affected by migration, either as origin, destination, or transit. Second, they're mostly problems of a transnational nature, where it's not just a relationship, as I said, between the individual and the state, but also between state and state. And therefore, you need sovereign nations to cede some part of their sovereignty to a supranational body, which will be a rule-based body which can enforce, international law. Last point is, I think there is also the problem of harmonization across countries, harmonization of law. So for all of these reasons, UNHCR and many of the other initiatives of the United Nations have been less than optimal.
Thank you. I think I will ask Sita my next question. Since you spoke, a couple of things actually. India and the Global Compact on Migration, India's role has largely been, whatever we've read in the papers and everything, it's largely been about this insistence, like you said, on regular migration and how they only want to encourage regular migration. So again, stigmatizing irregular migration. But obviously, India has a lot of irregular migrants as well. It may not have the world's largest number of irregular migrants. And the majority of our immigrants may be regular, people with documents. But we do have a very large number of people who do go abroad without documentation, through touts, through agents. We've all read media coverage of it, which is really, it's quite popular. It's common knowledge that in certain parts of the country, people do leave for better opportunities abroad. So my question is really, why this insistence, firstly? Why this sort of pushing aside these people who are also ours? Because you may go to another country, but you don't lose citizenship of India. They are not stateless people. A lot of them can establish Indian nationality, I'm sure, by the usual routes, by saying, this is where I'm from, this is my village. And then the government or whoever the agency mandated is doing that check and finding out that, yes, this person does indeed belong to this particular village in this state. So why this sort of pushing these people aside? The second thing I'd like you to talk a little bit more about is this divergent regime for Nepalis and Bangladeshis. I think a lot of us are not going into the reason for why Nepali immigrants are accepted much faster than Bangladeshi immigrants. They provide the same kind of services. There are other issues at play. There are political considerations, there are communal issues. Those are all very much a part of the migration discourse. Migration is not just about people coming in and taking away jobs. We are okay with certain people coming in and taking away jobs or doing those jobs. We are not okay with certain other people coming and doing those jobs even for cheaper rates. Why is that? So there are lots of other factors at play, which are largely of culture, of comfort with a certain population. And I think as lawyers, we don't go into those issues because, again, we believe that everybody is equal in the eyes of the law, but the fact is that they're not. So maybe, a little bit more on that divergence. Thank you.
Okay. So two questions, and separately. I have touched on them when I was speaking. But on the irregular migration, I mean, it does... there are two factors here. India does want to promote regular migration, and that is a good thing. Like I said, they really see that this is also the solution of how you engage with the world, how a positive engagement on migration can actually take place, is when you actually do not, you focus on the regular passage, you focus on the regular corridors, you look at how more of regular migration can happen so that the irregular migration is actually reduced in a way. But there's also, and I've been trying to stay away from this in a way, but there is a truth in the fact that if you meet with some of these irregular migrants, and they're Indians, there's no doubt about it, this part of we cannot prove the Indianness in today's world is shrinking, to be honest. Our passports are biometric, we have so much more communication that links up people. It's easier to prove that somebody is Indian than it ever was before. So, but it's used as very much, the reasoning. But when I meet, and I've met many of them, there is a certain apathy. There is a certain, it's almost as if they could be sacrificed. It's okay. We can forget about them. Because they come from certain groups of India which are not so relevant to us, which can be left out. It's okay. They have been clubbed as anti-state if you're coming from Punjab. And this has happened very often, that you are kind of, because you're from Punjab, you're automatically treated with a certain level of discrimination, which should not be happening, but it does happen. And that you and that you are kind of showing India low and down by coming in irregularly. So already in the eyes of some of the people who are upholding India globally, this is a problem, that you have all these irregular migrants coming in. And there isn't much understanding shown towards them, or the fact that maybe, and a lot of them do come from Punjab if you're in the West, there's something happening in Punjab which is very wrong, which is actually pushing some of these people out. But that is not to be taken into consideration at some levels. And this is problematic. I mean, I won't say that it is not problematic. They also belong to classes that don't have the political standing that you and I would have in spaces. They don't form, the diaspora can be quite split. In fact, when we speak of diaspora, we often speak of those in the West who are highly educated and come from a certain group, whereas we forget some of the Gulf sometimes. We treat them more as, these are the Indian workers, whereas the diaspora is actually the one in the US. So this is a problem of our thinking. This is how we have over years also been looking at migration, because we've not looked at it in frameworks. We've just used our lenses that are a reflection of our existence in our society as it is today. So I think these are some of the problems, and we've just taken them on. Because we don't have frameworks, because we don't have some of the structures that would help us to think through some of these things, or give us the policy direction that is needed to address some of these things, without, like lawyers, I would say, so with the fairness that is needed on them, without the biasness that comes in if you don't have these frameworks. So I think this has stayed on, and this is why the irregular debate has, the discourse from India has been the way it has been, I feel, in some ways. On the Nepali and Bangladeshi issue, like you said, it's migration is not about one thing or the other. It is a multitude of things, and politics is very high on migration, if not the highest. In fact, we are trying to look at a paper that looks at politics in this. And Nepal has been a huge political angle for us also. The Friendship Treaty is open borders. It's remarkable that we have an open border where Nepalis can come in and have access to our markets, our societies, and this has been almost natural because it's been an open border. You almost think that if you actually let it happen on the other side, you might actually have a better world. But it has been very political more than anything else. The Nepali reason to have this friendship, to have this open border, has, Nepal plays this role of protecting us from China, let's not forget it. And that's been part of the reason of why we have such had such friendly relations with Nepal. So I would think that a lot of migration cannot be seen in isolation, and we should not see it in isolation because of the fact that it is linked to so many other issues. It's linked to communal issues as well. This is true. We can't run away from it. However sticky and difficult these issues are, they are real. And they exist, and it is important for us to understand them and know that they are there and that they form our biases as well, and they form how policy is made sometimes as well. And therefore the Nepalis and the Bangladeshis will always be seen differently, I think, in this country, despite the fact that they needn't be. There's nothing one is doing or the other is not doing. They needn't be seen like that, but that's just the nature of how societies are actually, and how sovereign states are. I mean, we can all want a borderless world, but we live in a world which is increasingly having larger borders and stronger borders than ever before. So, yeah.
So would you like to respond, especially on the first question? I was just wondering if there was some kind of an explanation for this insistence on regular migration. And just those 97 people that you spoke about, the 6 that were Indian, possibly irregular migrants, without papers, they had left India, let's say, illegally to go to another country. How would the government respond to that? Because like in the case of the 40 workers from Punjab and Iraq, the unfortunate events that transpired there, we do know that the government was, well, kind of dragged its feet on it, let's say. I can say this as someone from civil society at least. Dragged its feet on it, didn't do quite what would have been ideal in terms of rescuing them as soon as possible, or at least taking that up and kind of finding out their whereabouts. Mostly because they were, again, irregular. There was no documentation of them having left through the right legal channels.
Yeah, very brief response would be that, I think it's time to look at conceptually how irregular migration, smuggled people and trafficked people are different, okay?